Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the BuzzStream podcast. I'm your host, Vince Nero, and today I'm thrilled to be joined by Bernard Huang. He is the founder of ClearScope, which is an SEO platform that you all should check out. We'll talk about that a bit in the podcast, but today I really want to focus on what Bernard has really put together in terms of his playbook for getting into AEO, GEO, getting your brand mentioned in AI answers, which is obviously on everyone's mind. And, in the digital PR space, there's a big component of it. I know the owned side of it is a piece of it. We're going to talk about that. But I think Bernard does a really good job of kind of explaining the through lines for all the stuff we do, how we get, from the training data into kind of the corpus of information these large language models using these training sets. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. But before we do, I just want to remind everyone to hit that subscribe button, share this stuff with your colleagues. And number two is that List IQ is live, our media list building tool that helps PR pros like our listeners build media lists directly from Google News. It's super cool. It's, we're getting some great feedback, really speeds up the process for those hyper targeted media lists. So thrilled about that. But I am most excited here, Bernard. Thanks so much for joining us. How you doing, man?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. All in all, can't complain. I'm happy, healthy, like those around me are, and that brings a smile to my face. So
yeah,
happy
and
to be
hey,
here.
you got engaged. I don't know if this is podcast worthy, but you got engaged. Congrats over the
Thank you.
holidays.
Yeah,
So you
it's
gotta give a
good.
shout out there. Yeah, awesome. Okay. So let's jump into this because there's a lot to cover. And like I said, you do a great job, I think, of explaining this. You walked me through this last time we talked, and I came away with a lot of questions, but I was very excited. So let's start with the straight, kind of simple question. What does it take to get into citations? That's what everybody wants to know.
What does it take? Yeah, I think that the short story is that it takes brand equity, and that means that your brand has been around for at least a little bit. It's contributed to the topic that you want to be associated with, and it has authority. It has links from reputable sources, and it has covered the topic that you want to be cited for comprehensively and well. That's it in a nutshell.
So yeah, I mean that's a big piece of it. I want to get into the kind of content creation piece and kind of the relevance thing. But I think one thing I want to make sure I'm understanding and our listeners are understanding is there's a difference between getting cited as like a link, right? And being cited as part of the training data. Can you kind of explain a little bit of the difference there? When AI does go to kind of cross-check this, retrieve information, that doesn't necessarily mean you're in the training data, right? And vice versa. So can you explain a little bit of that difference?
Sure. Yeah, I think it's great that you bring it up in a good foray for this audience here that's tuning in into how AI generates a response. So if you think about you as a user and you're prompting Gemini, ChatGPT, Claude, so on and so forth, you have to ask yourself, what are the mechanisms that an AI has to generate the answer or the response that you're going to get back as the end user? And when you break it down, what you start to understand is that there's three distinct layers in how an AI formulates a response. At the foundational level, you have the training data that an AI has been trained on. And, this is typically billions of different web documents, common crawl data, Wikipedia, and, whatever secret sauce elements that these different models are using. And that's the underlying corpus of information that an AI model builds on top of. So that's step one. Let's say I'm asking ChatGPT, what are the best SEO tools, then ChatGPT has a good understanding of SEO tool. All of that's been discussed, and it starts and it looks at its own knowledge for that particular topic. Step 2 is very interesting, but this is the reason why SEO plays such a critical role in how AIs generate responses. And this is the grounding layer, I think is what it's typically referred to. I call it the validation layer, because what the agent is doing is that it is doing research on behalf of the prompter, right? If again, we go back to the best SEO tools, what the agent or the AI model wants to do is to say, okay, well, I have an understanding of what the best SEO tools are, but I need to validate that my understanding is still up to date, fresh, and relevant with what is currently on the market. This is why agents will search, right? They'll perform AI web searches for best SEO tools, maybe best keyword research tools, so on and so forth, because they want to augment and make sure that the response that they're about to give back is up to date on pricing, features, different new tools that may have entered the market. So that's step 2. Step 3 is simply the personalization and context layer. So as you may be aware, the AI models want to make sure that the answers they're getting back to you are personalized and contextual to what you need. And so if I've had past conversations where I've told the model, I work at a software company and I'm based in Austin, then the AI model will typically remember that, again, depending on your settings, and they'll use that to then infer, they might say, oh, well, the best SEO tools for B2B software segment is X, Y, or Z. And that's where you get, the last layer of like augmentation before the response gets handed back to you. So in essence, when we're thinking about this, and I believe the original question is like, okay, well, how do you say influence the training data and or win an AI citation? What we have to start to think about is, well, layer number 1, which is the training data set, and layer number 2, which is the research that the model does. Okay, how do we then influence training data or the research or the grounding that the agent has to do? What we found is that the fastest way to influencing the model is not at the training data layer, because training data is very expensive to create such a big data set and train a new model on. It takes a long time, so it's slow. But to intersect the model when it's doing research on behalf of the user to make sure that the information it's about to give out is up to date and relevant. So what we're seeing is that you just create relevant, high quality content that targets the AI reasoning chain. And when I say reasoning chain, it's just to say that you can peel back the layer on how all of these different AI models work by looking at how they're thinking about the prompt that you've given it. And oftentimes it will show you okay, well, to find the best SEO tools, I've begun my search by searching best SEO tools. I found that there are, 4 different categories. There's on-page, off-page, technical, so on and so forth. And it's I am investigating each one by performing additional searches for best technical tools, best keyword research tools. And then you take that information and you say, okay, well, if I want to be present for that AI model, then I need to create content that targets the way that the AI is researching the topic.
Right. So is this something that people can do without creating content on their site? Can you solely focus on off-page, link building, citation, citation, let's not use that word, off-page, getting coverage from high-end news sources. That is, I think, one of the big pieces, obviously in my industry, in the digital PR space, but does that exist in a vacuum, or do you need to also kind of build this topical relevance by creating content and topical authority by creating your own content?
Yeah, I think the short answer is that there's no one size fits all in this particular world. I say that in the sense that, let's say you're a local plumber in a smallish city like Kyle, Texas, or something like that. In that particular world, if there was somebody who was geolocated in Kyle, Texas, and they were searching, best plumbers for Kyle, or they didn't even need the Kyle, Texas part because that's inferred, then it's possible that simply having a Google My Business and a Yelp page is good enough because there's not that much competition, right? There's not that many people who are plumbers that serve the area of Kyle, Texas. So I think in those cases, like, strong third-party signals, whether they be Google My Business, Yelp, Reddit mentions, so on and so forth, I think will go a long way in a not so competitive ecosystem and environment. That said, right, as you're trying to vie for influencing the model at more competitive topics and higher up the funnel in terms of informational query, I think that the models are going to want more and more demonstrated topic expertise, right? It's like if that plumber in Kyle, Texas wants to be cited for what is a plumber, then you can imagine they're going to have to do a lot more work to build up, the authority on the topic, to create tons of content, to then, get citation, to get backlinks and all these things from, other sources to basically prove that they are authoritative. So I would say it really depends on your industry. And it also really depends on, what stage of the funnel that you want to go after. But we've seen things as simple as creating one piece of content that's like, I'm a plumber in Kyle, Texas, and that solely being enough for that plumber to start to show up in commercial prompts for that area.
Yeah, I mean, I've been digging into a lot of data to kind of understand. I feel like it depends on the type of prompt, right? Like if it is a more informational type of prompt, like it's pulling different kinds of information, whereas like if it's a brand awareness query, you dig like who are the best plumbers, or like, is such and such plumber a great plumber? Like you're seeing a lot more like websites mentioned, like homepages mentioned, or like about us pages mentioned, cited, rather than it pulling, just a random informational blog post. So I wonder, like the conversation we have a lot internally here is like, okay, is informational content even worth doing if users are going to get most of it from ChatGPT, Gemini, without even clicking through? They're going to get their answer and not click through. Whereas the bottom funnel stuff, maybe they will, because, they're going to get informed and then they're going to jump in. So it's this kind of like butting heads where it's, you need to make informational content to inform the model and show that you're authoritative, but like, who's going to be clicking on this isn't going to be driving any traffic to your website. I mean, does that vibe with what you're seeing?
Absolutely. And I think the jury is still out in terms of the influence of informational top of funnel content and your site. And what I mean by that more concretely is, let's say NerdWallet, right, who's an authority on personal finance, credit cards, so on and so forth. They, in the past, would have had tons of informational content on what is a credit score, how to improve your credit score, what is a travel credit card, how is that different than an airline credit card, so on and so forth. Whereas, nowadays, people, when they Google, airline credit card versus travel credit card, they get a nice little AI overview that says, well, these are the key differences, and this is what you have to pay attention to. And all of a sudden, NerdWallet, as the publisher of that content, is no longer receiving as much, if any, traffic to those pages, right? Because they end up being a little card that says, yes, that particular piece of content was used as a source. And, if you want to check out the sources, here they are. So that begs the question, is that content still valuable, right? In the sense that it's not really getting you much traffic, but it is building authority with the model that your brand, and more specifically your domain, does know what it's talking about for that particular topic. So all that to say, the jury is still out in terms of how much that is worth. I have to believe that topic authority, which is your domain's ability to be visible during the research process that agents take, whether it's the training data itself or the, grounding with web search that happens, has to be worth something. I just don't know, is that 60%? Is that 40%? Is that 10%? I don't know. And I think a lot of people are trying to figure that out, but I haven't seen conclusive evidence pointing to a strong or weak rating at this particular point.
Yeah, I mean, there seems to be a lot of correlative data, at least between ranking, in the blue links and showing up, at least in AI overviews, as a citation. So that, to me, kind of leans at least somewhat in that direction of it being worthwhile to rank, which means you do have to create content. It's interesting because we are getting to that place where are we just creating content just to inform this thing, just content for content's sake, rather than like content that your people are going to actually read and interact with, which kind of gets me to the next point. We talked a little bit about this where, the type of content, and there's a lot of talk online about things like chunking and how much content you need to create. Should you be creating these big, long guides? I know some research has come out recently that like Google has a specific allotted, character count that they crawl from every page in order when they do this retrieval. So if you could talk a little bit about that, I'd be curious to see your take on the depth of content, I guess, when you're creating this.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it's the wild wild west when it comes to the AI stuff. And yes, I know exactly the research piece that you're talking about where, there is an allotment of 2,000 characters that I believe Gemini allocates to its grounding budget to then say that, it can only be influenced up to, this amount of characters, and then it distributes that by, how the ranking, and if you're rank number 1, maybe you absorb 50% of that budget to augment the overall response. I mean, I think, not to get into the semantics and the micro of it all, I think, 2,000 today could be 4,000 tomorrow, which could be 500, 1 year from now. So I think that, when I look at some of the data studies that are coming out, I say, okay, well, at a high level, just taking a couple steps back, it's clear that AI, wants to produce a highly accurate, highly relevant, and somewhat personalized response when it's prompted with anything that you ask it. And so I think you're going to see varying degrees of budget, just from okay, how much do I need to rely on your content versus how much should I rely on my own training data to give a response? I think that should be probably a fluid, sort of analysis where it's probably looking to see, okay, from these are, if I'm saying what is the first president of the United States, which is in essence a fact, and the AI, when it reads all of the answers on the internet, has come up with a 99.99999% likelihood of confidence that it's George Washington, then it's going to allocate no budget to that particular prompt because it says everything is the same, therefore this answer is always true. There it is, right? Obviously, if you were to be able to bluff the model into well, George Washington is close to Abraham Lincoln, and then convince it to say Abraham Lincoln instead, I think that would be obviously a huge problem with AI. So anyways, I think there's a lot of different theories out there. And I'll just say that the core theories that exist are actually somewhat disparate. On one hand, you have, I think, advocates who talk about cosine similarity and knowledge graph, like entity relevance and cohesiveness. And what that refers to is the idea that to cover a topic comprehensively, there are key entities and subtopics that ought to surround that particular topic. So, trying to go with, I guess, best SEO tools as an example, a great piece of content that talks about it probably has to include Ahrefs, SEMrush, Moz, so on and so forth, because those are the best SEO tools. And the lack of inclusion of one of those particular entities would demonstrate a lack of comprehensiveness for that particular topic. So one line of thinking says, okay, to vie for inclusion, I not only need to talk about, all of those different things that are known and closely associated with the topic, but, I need to add on to that particular list and be, also semantically coherent and relevant. So then you would start to say, okay, well, if we're talking about best SEO tools, then we would add Screaming Frog or ClearScope or Sitebulb or all of these other like patterns or iterations that are, again, close enough related to the main topic, but just trying to basically pack it all in as closely as possible. That would refer to kind of aspects of what we're seeing with the chunking, the cosine similarity, the topical relevance, the LSI type stuff. So that's one school of thought. The other school of thought talks about information gain, and information gain at a high level just refers to the fact that, topics evolve over time. And just because best SEO tools doesn't currently include a lot of the AI visibility stuff that's on the market, whether it be Peak, Profound, Scrunch, whatever, it doesn't mean that those aren't great SEO tools, because, AEO or GEO is converging with SEO. And so a piece of content talking about best SEO tools might include a bunch of different disparate information sources to say, this is a future state of, where this topic might be heading. And so there's another school of thought that says it's not about creating more and more tight and comprehensive, entities packed together, but it's about expanding that and showing that you're adding to the topic in unique and interesting ways that the topic then gains information on. And so anyways, I think those are the two main current themes, is that you have a lot of people saying, okay, how do we pack in more entities? How do we make the chunks and the passages tight, semantically relevant? And that makes the algorithm happy. And then you have this other school of thought that's like, how can we add to this topic in a meaningful way that people aren't really even thinking about at the moment, and have that be how we come out as unique and interesting and, something that is AI citation worthy.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fantastic kind of thought experiment going through a lot of this stuff. I mean, the thing, so I want to dig into a couple more specific digital PR things, and I want to kind of circle back to kind of how ClearScope fits into this, because I think it does fit in nicely to both of those things that we talked about. So off-page SEO, specifically getting your brand mentioned in high DA, top tier, whatever you want to call it, relevant news publications, alongside of your core keywords. So if I got to write up for BuzzStream, I would want it to say, from Forbes, BuzzStream, email outreach platform or whatever, email outreach platform, BuzzStream, and the BuzzStream is the link. And then it talks about some relevant news piece that I have pitched. That to me is the clearest kind of way to signal, okay, this is that relevant, this is the kind of entity strengthening that we're doing. We're talking about, having your keyword associated with your brand. Tell me a little bit about that. I mean, is that kind of how you think about the off page, the digital PR, even link building, the traditional link building, and that's how that fits?
Yeah. I mean, in a nutshell, the practices of off-page answer engine optimization are very similar to SEO, with a couple caveats. Caveat number one is that there is a distinction between like links and co-mentions. So what I mean by links in a traditional like world, I log into my BuzzStream, I see that I want to pitch this journalist at, Forbes, and I write to them and they say, okay, it's going to cost you whatever, $3,000 for an inclusion. And, I'm like, oh, but do I get a do follow link? And then they're like, oh, if you want a do follow link, that's 5,000. And then, it's this sort of dance. And then they put in sponsored because, that's what they're legally obligated to do, even though I want to fight for it not to be sponsored. In any case, you get this link and the link passes equity because the crawler, right? We're talking about Google here. The crawler looks at Forbes and says, wow, there's a link to BuzzStream. Like, okay, well, let me follow that. They follow that to the page or homepage that it links to and says, okay, well, Forbes is basically voting that BuzzStream, whether it's the article or the homepage, is good. And that's how SEO worked. But large language models are different. Large language models are, again, corpuses of documents that are looking at associations between topics and entities, and it's constantly looking at that. So in the large language model world, or we'll say Gemini. For Gemini, right, it looks at a document that's written on Forbes and it says, okay, that's interesting. And then it sees BuzzStream mentioned alongside entities or topics like journalist outreach or PR or building authority. And then it basically builds an internal idea that BuzzStream as an entity is related to all of those particular topics. It did not at all need to follow the link that the Forbes article had to BuzzStream to make that inference that BuzzStream is indeed basically, helps with those particular kinds of like topics and build that like relationship. So that's one of the key differences that we're seeing play out in terms of digital PR, is that the link is becoming less important. And this is why you're seeing a lot of more shady practitioners of AEO and GEO go around being like, oh, let me just spam Reddit for you, right? When they're spamming Reddit, all that they're doing is that, like, we'll take ClearScope as an example, right? They're just basically trying to inject as many comments as possible that says like ClearScope best SEO tool, best AEO tool. Like ideally that would be what the footprint would be, but then mods and everybody would just ban all those accounts. So it has to sound somewhat like, human written and whatnot. So they spin it in that way. But that's why you see, comment spam being such a thing that people recommend and get results with, is because it's more around creating the linkages in topics and entities rather than creating the linkages through backlinks.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking through so I just saw a couple of reactive campaigns that I highlighted on LinkedIn because, I'm a baseball fan. There was this baseball player who was offered free stakes for life if he re-signed in Toronto, right? This guy, Bo Bichette, he re-signs with the Toronto Blue Jays, free stakes for life. And this blew up for this steakhouse, right? Blew up on social, and then went on to get them a lot of links from local Toronto news sites. So when you're talking about the value of something like that for AI, walk me through kind of that, because to me, like, unless I don't think they necessarily, it was like, sorry, let me back up. A lot of times I would see Toronto Steakhouse, has fun offer, whatever. Toronto Steakhouse called Animal Steakhouse. And like, so you'd see those mentioned. So is it just that idea that it's like, you're getting mentioned as a Toronto Steakhouse in Toronto by Toronto web pages, and like that's kind of the overall outcome that you want in that scenario? Like, how does that benefit AI in your
Yeah, so I think there is like a first order benefit and then like a second order benefit. So I think the first order benefit, and this is true for I think a lot of PR that's not just AI, like an AI benefit, is that you just get the halo effect. And the halo effect means you have, social media talking about it, you have local news outlets talking about it, and through that, there's just this general like buzz that everybody picks up on that is generally a good thing, right? That's why there's that statement, all PR is like good PR. So that's kind of the first order effect. I think the second order effect is that you start to create documents within authorities on the web that create new linkages between your brand and the topics that you care about, for better or for worse, right? Like, this is why, negative PR is a thing. And this is also why a lot of people who get into, you know, splashes of bad like moments will lean on positive PR to basically shove that stuff down, right? I'm sure you've probably heard of it, but like, when Neil Patel got sued by like FTX because they did a deal with them and, Neil Patel walked away with a bunch of money. Neil like ended up donating, like some money to some charity. And then, if you Google Neil Patel, like you would see his donations to the charity rather than the fact that he was being sued by like the FTX like claims lawyers or whatnot. And so in any case, what you're doing as a second order effect is that you're just creating documents that are generally from higher authoritative sites. And then those are being used either during the training data step or at least during the grounding step. And then that helps influence the model to push, your brand or you yourself closer or away from, the entities that you would want to be surrounded by.
Because it is a kind of a probability play, right? It's, how likely, like if it's someone searching for Neil Patel, how likely is the next thing going, like, Neil Patel, then fill in the blank, that blank, as the LLM kind of tries to answer this, it's all probabilistic, right? So if all of the articles are talking about FTX, then the next words are going to be about FTX. But if you've pushed up all of that news about the charity, then maybe the likelihood that the next word will be about the charity. I mean, is that kind of how?
That's right. That's right. Yeah, that's essentially how it worked in SEO.
Yeah.
Which is why there's, again, lots of parallels between influencing rankings and influencing algorithm, like AI models.
All right. So one more question, and then I want to talk about ClearScope. How, if we're talking specifically about digital PR, how would you track success when you're talking about digital PR and AI?
Yeah, it's a brilliant question. So I think that the way to track success is to get a prompt tracker, or I mean, you don't need a prompt tracker, but just like ask Gemini and ChatGPT, what is the best like commercial query that makes sense for your brand and your industry. Just as an example, with ClearScope, it would be best SEO tool, it would be best AEO tool. Those would be different commercial questions or prompts that we care about owning and being recommended when a user asks that. It's very easy, or you could go to AI mode or Gemini or ChatGPT and just be like, what are the best X tools or services or whatever it is that, you care about? And then see what it responds with. Then we would say, okay, well, you want to build a PR campaign, which then basically influences the way that the models think about your brand so that you get either recommended or you like somehow get up the list, or the sentiment of your brand like changes, right? Because sometimes you're like, what are the best SEO tools? And then, you're like way down on like the list. It's like, okay, you're on it, but you're not high up on the list. And then, the second thing is that you could be on it, but then it could be like a mixed thing, right? It's like, oh, ClearScope, like some say it's too expensive, some say it doesn't work, right? Like, so there's a lot of different ways to like think about visibility. But I mean, the tried and true is find the commercial prompt that you care about and then do a digital PR campaign. Don't worry too much about links. I don't think links are as important. I would say that I think what's important is rankings. So you're going to be much better off if you can have a digital PR campaign that targets a website that is on the front page of Google already, right? So it's much better to Google, best SEO tools, see that there's a, backlinko article or something like that, and then try really hard to get backlinko to add ClearScope than, like it is to necessarily just kind of cold pitch a bunch of stuff, get some journalists to write about, what you've done. I'm not saying that that doesn't work. I'm just saying you're going to get a lot more bang for your buck, because that high ranking website is not only going to be crawled faster, it's going to be seen as more authoritative by the AI models, and therefore the weighting that, the models give to that particular document is going to be way higher than something that's a bit more unproven.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. All right. So now I want to give you a chance to, you kind of walk me through this when we get back to kind of the content side of things. I thought you did a great job of kind of showing me where a tool like ClearScope kind of fits into this idea of like building this topical authority, because we do know, I think it is, for the most part, for most brands that are probably listening, you do need to have a content aspect, unless you're just like a logo plumber, like you said. It's very similar to SEO, right? So talk to me a little bit about just kind of how ClearScope fits into that kind of topical authority workflow.
Sure. Yeah. So again, a couple of caveats. I recognize that AI visibility is a fast moving and fast changing landscape. Nothing is completely guaranteed. GPT going from 5.2 to like 6 could just change the entire rules of the game. And, nothing is, super certain. Also, Google's AI mode, I think it's a matter of when, not if, right? When that releases, that's going to have different implications on to, how all of this stuff like works. But all right, so ClearScope, what we do is that we try a lot of different experiments, and then we validate what we're seeing happen, and then we do our best to help our customers with the same, and we wrap it all around our software product, where we start to have differences in how at least we're thinking about things is, number one, by giving people prompt tracking, which on the surface is fairly commoditized, right? You could go to any one of these prompt tracking that keep popping up like every week that charge, next to nothing. And all they're doing is hitting different APIs and saying, was your brand mentioned and was your domain cited, right? That's like very stock, very commoditized stuff. But we go one level deeper and we help you understand how the agents are researching that particular topic. So if we go back to the best SEO tools example, we would have looked at the reasoning chain for GPT and Gemini, and we would say, hey, well, when Gemini looked deeper into this particular topic, it searched best SEO tools for agencies. It searched best, technical SEO tools. And that's very interesting stuff, because that's content that you should be producing to increase your domain surface area of proving to the model that you should belong closely with the topics that you care about. So that's pretty unique to what we're doing, and we're constantly refining, how that process works. Step 2 in this process is to create high quality and relevant content. Now, high quality and relevant content has almost always been subjective. What makes a piece of content high quality and relevant, and what our bread and butter is helping you understand what that looks like from a comprehensiveness standpoint. So back to, an earlier statement that I said, there are different schools of thought in terms of what high quality means. In the ClearScope world, we grade you on semantic comprehensiveness, and then we suggest extra entities and concepts that you should probably include to make your piece of content even more holistic in terms of covering all of the known entities. And, we help you package all of that together. I got an AI draft builder and soon a way to just automatically optimize your content for relevance. Lastly is tracking, right? Tracking in this new world also looks different. There has been no shortage of people, just being really frustrated and angry about their loss in clicks. And it's because AI's responsibility is no longer to send traffic to your site. It is simply to answer the question that the user asks. So traffic is no longer a good sense of demarcating, am I doing well in SEO or AEO? Instead, we have to think about it differently. And, the ways that we think about it is more or less how everybody else thinks about it. How many times is your brand being mentioned for the topics and prompts that you care about? And how many pages on your website is being cited for the prompts and topics that you care about. So we give you visibility into that as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fantastic tool. It's come a long way, since I used it at Siege and then with Grid Group. With this addition of the AI tools, I think just makes it that much more powerful. So definitely check it out if you haven't. Bernard, I typically ask people, let's go over what's a good thing that I haven't asked you. I don't want to take up more of your time. I know this was a lot of stuff. Maybe we can have a part 2 of this in 6 months or something when everything is changed and our strategies are all different, but I really appreciate your time. Like I said, Bernard has a great webinar that he kind of walked through this. I'll make sure to link to this in the comments as well. But Bernard, thank you so much for your time. This was super helpful, super insightful.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Vince.
Yeah. Reminder again, like, subscribe. You can find Bernard on LinkedIn. He's got his personal website, but also check out ClearScope. His personal website is just his name, Bernard J. Huang, Huang. But yeah, definitely follow him. So he's putting out great stuff on LinkedIn. So good luck out there, everyone, and thanks for watching.